With every passing week, the DFS season comes to a close. Just one after the other. And you don't want to miss out on your opportunity to win big. Our own Scott Barrett, big time winner this week, cashing in $25K. Another Fantasy Point subscriber came in, stealing the thunder at 30,000. You're not going to want to miss the Fantasy Points DFS content. And guess what? This early in the week, it starts right here. The earliest look the industry will give you. With myself, I am Thomas Tipple. Joining me as always is Jake Tribbey for the DFS Early Look video edition for those of you who are visual learners. Jake, what do we have on tap this week? It was kind of a weird week this week. Anyone without McCaffrey is probably kind of a sad panda, but let's dive right in. Most important position on the field, it's quarterback. Let's talk the Chicago Bears and Justin Fields, QB3, 7,100 over on DraftKings, Fanduel, 8,300. QB2, expecting a huge week after kind of a down week thanks to a drop ball by Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, so Fields didn't get a chance to show off his nuclear fantasy upside in week 15 in a very tough matchup against the Browns defense, but he draws a far more appealing matchup this week against Arizona, who's the 8th softest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing quarterbacks this year. Justin Fields has really taken advantage of plus matchups this season. He's averaging 25.4 DraftKings fantasy points per game and 0.74 fantasy points per dropback in top 10 schedule adjusted matchups. Those marks would both rank first among all quarterbacks over the full season. And with Fields still $600 cheaper than his week 1 DraftKings price tag, he's shaping up as one of the strongest quarterback values of the slate.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to watch him run wild on Arizona. It's just going to be his weapons. I'm buying all in on the Bears this week. Speaking of buying all in, for a while, same game from week 15. Joe Flacco looked like he was kind of playing for the Ravens, if you know what I mean. He was tossing yeet ball after yeet ball up in the air, but what an amazing play by Amari Cooper. He absolutely crushes his fantasy upside with that play. Let's talk about Joe Flacco doing the unbelievable this week against the Houston Texans. DraftKings 5,500, only QB 13. FanDuel 7,100, QB 11 for a guy who's just throwing 320 yards a game.
Yeah, it's incredible. He's made 3 starts this season, and he's clearly still elite because he's leading the NFL in passing yards per game with 313 while ranking as the quarterback 3 by DraftKings fantasy points per game. A big part of Flacco's fantasy efficacy so far has come from him being hyper-aggressive throwing the ball downfield. 38% of Joe Flacco's pass attempts have traveled over 10 air yards. That's the 3rd highest rate among all quarterbacks. And the Browns have really leaned into Joe Flacco's aggressiveness. Prior to Flacco taking over, Cleveland's neutral situation pass rate was just 55%, which ranked 29th. But over the last 3 weeks with Joe Flacco, that number has ballooned to 65%, which ranks 13th. It only took the addition of Joe Flacco for the Browns to truly become a pass-first offense. And this week, Flacco draws the Texans in a game with a semi-encouraging total at 42.5, but what's far more encouraging is the on-paper matchup. Houston ranks as the 6th softest schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing quarterbacks this year. I'd expect Flacco to be right there as the most popular way to punt quarterback this week at just 5,500. I mean, you could argue he should be 1,000 more expensive with the way he's playing.
He's doing things that nobody could possibly have expected. And you want to talk about a cheap way for an elite stack? We're going to complete this stack at the end of this program for a little teaser. It's just unbelievable what Joe Flacco is doing. He's on his Super Bowl run from way back when at this point. It's insane. Let's switch up the pace. And speaking of switching up a pace, we have Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, the Miami Dolphins, unbelievable running game where it just feels like they are deliberately feeding Raheem Mostert touchdowns to break records at this point. It is unreal what he's doing. I didn't see it coming. I don't think most people did. Let's talk about, for the first time on this program, a tandem of running backs against a Cowboys team that just got absolutely carved up by James Cook.
Yeah, so if you look through these week 16 game totals, you're going to arrive at one conclusion, and it's that this Dallas at Miami game is easily the best offensive environment of the slate with a 51.5 total. I mean, games with a total over even 46 have been pretty rare in the second half of this season. So 51.5, I mean, that's like a 56 total from 2021. Obviously, we're going to want to attack this game for DFS. And what better area to attack than the Miami backfield, which has been nearly 14% more productive than the second best backfield in fantasy football this season. Miami's backfield has just been unreal. Raheem Mostert has averaged 22.2 DraftKings fantasy points per game in the 9 games Miami has scored 25 or more points, which easily ranks first among slate eligible running backs over the full season. And Devon Achane has averaged 26.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game in the 6 games he's earned multiple rush attempts. Obviously, that also leads all slate eligible running backs if you extrapolate it over the full season. And I think, it's important to note too that their upside matters a lot more on this particular slate, given, I'm showing running back pricing right now. We have no Christian McCaffrey. We have no Alvin Kamara. In terms of running back upside, you could argue this is one of the weakest slates we've seen all season. So, that's worth another boost to these Miami running backs. Of course, recent usage does favor Raheem Mostert. As you noted, 61% snap share and 53% of backfield usage over the last 2 weeks, including, crucially, a 100% snap share for Mostert inside the 10-yard line over that stretch. Mostert's going to be more popular. He'll probably be one of the highest owned running backs of this slate. But the reality is that both of these players have absolutely nuclear upside in the best scoring environment of the slate. And like you noted, we just saw Dallas get absolutely destroyed by James Cook. And, James Cook is a very good running back, but I think you could argue both Mostert and Achane are having significantly better seasons. They've both been hyper efficient. I mean, it's pretty easy to see either of these guys scoring 40 points this week.
Either, both, whichever way you want to look at it. You're really hoping for explosive touchdown plays here from Achane, but honestly, that's kind of what you're playing him any week for. The likelihood of him seeing 60% snap shares is pretty much non-existent on this team, but they might need the explosive plays to come from somewhere. Don't know what's going on with Tyreek. Will they focus on the ground game? Again, a blueprint possibly left by Buffalo and James Cook, another hyper explosive back. Let's find out what's going on in Miami this week. Devin Singletary was a fan favorite in DFS for weeks, and then Pierce came back, and he saw that kind of go away. And then he pretty much single-handedly won a game that nobody seemed to want to win on a late play last week. Well, he doesn't have a great matchup, but you have him listed here. He hits Cleveland. It's 5,500 on DraftKings. That's RB19. That's 6,200. RB20 over on Fanduel. Let's hear what you got, because Cleveland, not exactly the best matchup.
Yeah, so, on week 15, Devin Singletary was the RB2 by expected fantasy points, the RB6 by fantasy points scored, the RB5 by snap share, and the RB11 by route share. He's probably looking at mid-range RB1 usage for the remainder of the season. It's pretty clear he's the team's bell cow at this point, and it's a complete mystery, at least to me, why he's priced as a mid to low-end RB2 on both DFS sites for week 16. Obviously, as you noted, Cleveland is a below-average schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing running backs, but they've really only been barely so since week 7, ranking as around the 12th toughest schedule-adjusted matchup. Crucially, though, Houston should get CJ Stroud back this week, which raises the production floor of the entire offense. More points, of course, great for bell cows like Devin Singletary. I'd expect Singletary to draw plenty of ownership this week as a top value just because he's ridiculously cheap and he's out there for almost every snap in what is looking like one of the best games of the 1 p.m. window. Like I noted, this Houston-Cleveland game with a 42.5 total, doesn't sound great, obviously, but it is one of the better totals of the slate.
Early on, he's looking like a prime bringback for this game with some wide receiver questions. I mean, Noah Brown did technically cash this week, but watching the game and looking at the box scores, you'd kind of wonder how. So if you're looking for a cheap stack with a bringback to load up everywhere else, I think you're right. I think this Browns-Houston game is the way to go. Let's talk about one of the most elite players that steps on the field every week, who just unfortunately has Nick Mullins at quarterback. This is, of course, Justin Jefferson, still being priced very high. 8,100 on DraftKings, that's wide receiver 4, 9,200 on Fanduel. That is wide receiver 3. He obviously has to be listed because he is who he is, but for some doubters, why are we rolling through with Justin Jefferson right now at this price?
Yeah, so his return from injured reserve, it's been a bit overshadowed by huge fantasy outings on Saturday from teammates Ty Chandler and Jordan Addison, but Jefferson did lead Minnesota in expected fantasy points in their week 15 loss to Cincinnati. So he hasn't had a blow up game yet since returning from injured reserve, but it's safe to say Justin Jefferson is healthy and he's back to alpha wide receiver 1 status. And when was the last time we got to roster Jefferson for just 8,100 on DraftKings on a main slate? I can answer that question. It was week 1 of last season.
Oof.
Jefferson's average DraftKings price over his last 25 healthy games is nearly 9,000, meaning we're getting a $900 discount on one of the best wide receivers in football. But it gets better because Detroit is a top 5 schedule adjusted matchup for opposing outside wide receivers since week 10. And this game features the second highest total of the main slate. Like I said, Jefferson hasn't had a statement game since returning from IR, but week 16 is shaping up as one.
Yeah, I not only do I need it, I think everyone needs it. We love to see great players play great, and there's a lot of focus, like you said, on Addison. His ownership might really stack up as the week goes on, but his 2 catches, if you look at the catch percentage and what he was able to do, I think it skews people's opinions a little bit, which might maybe hopefully bring Jefferson's ownership a little bit down, and boy, will I be smashing that. Speaking of another wide receiver I'd love to smash in my lineups this week, Garrett Wilson. God, he's so good, but that quarterback room is so iffy, but the price, oh my God, 5,800 on DraftKings, that's wide receiver 17, FanDuel 7,000, wide receiver 15. Let's talk Garrett Wilson, why there's hope here.
Yeah, so, as we all know, Garrett Wilson is the wide receiver 3 by expected fantasy points since week 8, but of course, he's fallen way under his expectation, largely because of brutal quarterback play. We still can't bank on Wilson's quarterback play improving anytime soon, but we can bet on an overall improvement in efficiency for the talented wide receiver in an outstanding matchup this week. If you've watched this show at all, you'll know we've been targeting wide receivers against Washington all season, and that won't change in week 16 because they're the single softest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing wide receivers this year. 12 different players have gone over 90 receiving yards against Washington, and 10 of those players ran the majority of their routes on the outside, just like Garrett Wilson. It's extremely rare to get a chance to roster a wide receiver with high-end wide receiver 1 volume at a sub $6,000 salary on DraftKings, especially in the best possible matchup. I'd argue that even league worst quarterback play may not be able to slow down Garrett Wilson in week 16.
The Commanders let Cooper Kupp walk past 2 DBs down the sideline for a walk-in bomb, and that is all you need from Garrett Wilson at his price to absolutely tilt the scales in your favor. We talked about completing a cheap stack. Well, let's complete that stack. David Njoku, absolutely loving his connection with Joe Flacco. This man is his new Dennis Pitta, but way more freakishly athletic. It is insane what he is doing since Joe took over. Let's talk David Njoku, and I just want to hear more about him. He's unreal.
Yeah, so this run that he's been on since week 10 has been absolutely incredible. David Njoku has 13 more targets than the next closest tight end, again, since week 10, and he's easily pacing the position in expected fantasy points per game, posting usage that's 20% better than the next closest tight end. I mean, these are like the Travis Kelce gaps of previous seasons where Kelce was far and away the tight end 1, and then there was a huge gap to tight end 2, or, it's Kelce and Andrews, and then a huge gap to tight end 3. We're kind of seeing that right now with David Njoku and then everyone else. Cleveland has been right there as the league's most productive passing attack since Joe Flacco took over, as we noted at the beginning of the show. And the Browns leaning more into a pass-happy approach only raises Njoku's floor and ceiling. This Sunday, he draws a Houston defense that's been the fifth softest schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing tight ends since Week 7. This is an early preview of the week ahead, but it does feel very safe to declare Njoku as one of the best tight end plays of the Week 16 DFS slate, and maybe just one of the best plays overall.
I think there's a little bit more of a shift in some formats for a 2 tight end setup, and Njoku might be coming for one of those spots. There are a few tight ends that are getting used like a wide receiver 1, let alone an upper tier, and that's coming through, and it's Njoku. I am surprised guys like Ingram are above him. I understand why Laporta would be number 1, even Hawkinson and McBride, but Njoku is right up there. You don't have to pay for one of those top 4 when you got David Njoku sitting right there. And you look at the names underneath them, I just don't see that upside there. It's insane that we're getting cheaper Njoku than we probably should. Well, that wraps up another week of the DFS Early Look. Look, we're recording this Monday before Monday Night Football kicks off, and we understand that the fantasy playoffs, well, they're here. And if you get eliminated and you think your season is over, it's not. You can hop into even more DFS, and you can do that with a week's lineup of DFS content coming to Fantasy Points. Jake, what do we have for everyone that's going to need an outlet after their playoff losses? What do we have on deck for them in DFS?
Yeah, obviously, we all want to keep the season going as long as possible, and it will keep going here at Fantasy Points. Got the DFS Early Look article, comes out Tuesday mornings. We've got DFS Study Hall, which comes out on Thursday, DFS Values on Friday. That's a normal week. This week, a little bit different. We're still going to have Scott Barrett's big slate breakdown, still going to have Friday night caching points, but instead of Study Hall and Values like a normal week, I'm actually going to be writing up the 3-game Christmas Day slate. So for all you guys who want to gamble a little bit with your family, have some nice food, watch some football on Christmas Day, I will have a full slate breakdown. I promise it'll be the most comprehensive thing you could possibly imagine for a 3-game slate. And that should be available. I would imagine that will come out Saturday. So yeah, it's a great week for DFS. Got all 32 teams in action. And yeah, we'll have you covered content-wise here at fantasypoints.com.
I can't wait for this weekend. It's going to be such a great weekend of football. And, hey, Ravens, Christmas? I mean, baby, let's go. I can't wait. I'm just so excited. I love it here. We love all you guys for joining us. For myself, that's Thomas Tipple. For Jake Tribbey, this is the DFS Early Look. We'll see you next week. Good luck, everybody.